Sarah Nguyen's frozen body was found 47 meters below the Hillary Step. Her oxygen mask was still on her face. The tank was empty. It had been empty for 9 hours. And the 19-year-old Sherpa assigned to protect her? He was found 12 meters away, alive. But both his legs were black with frostbite. He would lose them both. This is not a story about a climber who got unlucky. This is the story of how a $22,000 price tag became a death sentence. How a budget expedition operator ignored 3 separate warnings. How a teenage Sherpa begged his employer to turn Sarah around and was told to keep climbing. How the cheapest Everest expedition on the market in 2019 wasn't cheap at all. It cost Sarah Nguyen her life. It cost Pasang Dorje his legs. And it exposed a system that has been killing climbers for decades, while the industry pretends it doesn't exist. If you're watching this thinking you'd never make Sarah's mistake, wait. Because Sarah wasn't reckless. She wasn't arrogant. She wasn't inexperienced. She was a 34-year-old schoolteacher from Melbourne who did her research, asked the right questions, and trusted professionals who lied to her face. The budget expedition industry doesn't kill stupid climbers. It kills trusting ones. By the end of this documentary, you'll understand exactly how the system works. You'll know the specific decisions that killed Sarah. You'll hear what Pasang Dorje tried to tell his operator, and why they silenced him. You'll see the evidence that 2 previous clients had died under nearly identical circumstances, and you'll understand why, despite everything you're about to learn, budget expeditions are more popular than ever. This is the complete story, not the 10-minute summary, not the sanitized version the expedition company wants you to believe. The full truth. Every warning ignored, every corner cut, every lie told. Let's start with the number that killed her, $22,000. That's what Sarah paid for her Everest expedition. The industry average in 2019 was $45,000 to $65,000. Premium operators charged $100,000 or more. Sarah paid less than half the minimum. But here's what nobody tells budget climbers. The mountain doesn't get cheaper. Permits cost the same. Food costs the same. Weather doesn't care about your budget. The only variables an operator can cut are the ones that keep you alive. Sarah's expedition cut 3 things. First, they assigned her a Sherpa with minimal experience. Second, they provided oxygen equipment that was 7 years old, far past recommended replacement. Third, they eliminated the backup systems that premium expeditions use when something goes wrong at 700 meters. Sarah knew none of this. She thought she was getting a deal. What she was getting was a calculated gamble with her life, and the house always wins. But Sarah's story doesn't start on Everest. It starts in a classroom in Melbourne, Australia, 14 months before her death. Because to understand why she trusted the wrong people, you need to understand who Sarah Nguyen actually was. She wasn't a thrill seeker. She wasn't chasing Instagram fame. She was a Year 6 teacher at Northcote Primary School who had discovered mountaineering at 29 and fallen in love with it. Her first climb was Mount Kosciuszko, Australia's highest peak, which most people hike in sneakers. But for Sarah, it sparked something. Over 5 years, she climbed methodically. Kilimanjaro, Aconcagua, Denali. Each summit was planned for a year. Each one pushed her limits slightly further. She wasn't fast. She wasn't naturally gifted. But she was disciplined. She trained 4 days a week. She studied altitude physiology. She read accident reports to learn from others' mistakes. Her students knew about her climbing. She used it to teach perseverance. The classroom had a map showing her completed summits. After Denali, the students asked the obvious question, "Are you going to climb Everest?" Sarah told them maybe someday. Then she went home and started researching. What she found was a price barrier she couldn't afford. Premium expeditions wanted $65,000 or more. Mid-range operators charged $45,000. On a teacher's salary with a Melbourne mortgage, neither was possible. Everest looked like a dream she'd have to defer for a decade. Then she found Himalayan summit expeditions, $22,000 all-inclusive. Permits, guides, oxygen, food, equipment, everything. The website showed smiling climbers on the summit. Testimonials praised the authentic experience and excellent value. The operator, a Nepalese company run by a man named Dawa Sherpa, had been operating for 7 years. Sarah did her due diligence, or she thought she did. She emailed past clients whose names appeared on the website. 2 responded with positive reviews. She checked climbing forums for complaints and found few. She asked about the oxygen equipment and was told it was regularly inspected. What Sarah didn't know, the 2 clients who gave positive reviews had climbed to base camp only. They'd never gone above 6,000 meters. The forum complaints had been systematically flagged and removed by the operator. The oxygen equipment hadn't been replaced since 2012. And she couldn't have known the most important thing. 2 clients from previous Himalayan summit expeditions had died on the mountain. But their deaths weren't attributed to the operator. One was listed as, quote, altitude sickness, the other as fall during descent. Neither investigation examined the equipment. Neither questioned the operator's practices. Sarah wired $22,000 to a Kathmandu bank account in December 2018. She would arrive in Nepal in April 2019. She would be dead by May 23rd. But Sarah wasn't the only person whose life would be destroyed by this expedition. Pasang Dorje was 19 years old when he was assigned to be Sarah's climbing Sherpa. He had summited Everest exactly once the previous season as an assistant to a senior guide. He had never led a client above Camp 3. He had never managed an oxygen emergency. He had never been responsible for another person's life above 8,000 meters. And he had told Dawa Sherpa, his employer, that he wasn't ready. Dawa's response, according to testimony Pasang would later give, was simple. She's a budget client. She doesn't need experienced guides. She needs someone to carry oxygen and point up. Pasang came from Kumjong, a village in the Everest region where climbing is the family business. His father had summited Everest 4 times. His uncle had died on K2 in 2008. The Dorje family understood mountains the way surgeons understand bodies, not as adventures, but as systems that demand respect. Pasang had grown up watching foreign climbers arrive with expensive gear and impossible confidence. He'd seen them dismiss Sherpa warnings. He'd carried the bodies of the ones who didn't listen. By 19, he already knew that Western climbers fell into 2 categories, those who trusted their Sherpas and those who died. But he'd never been assigned to someone like Sarah before, a budget client, someone who had been sold a service that couldn't possibly exist at that price point, someone whose survival would depend on equipment that was already failing, an operator who was already cutting corners, and a 19-year-old guide who had begged not to be given this responsibility. When Pasang met Sarah at base camp on April 15, 2019, he had already decided to do everything in his power to keep her alive. What he didn't know was that everything in his power wouldn't be enough. The first warning came on April 28th at Camp 2. Sarah had been acclimatizing for 2 weeks, following the standard rotation. Climb high, sleep low. She'd reached Camp 2 at 400 meters 3 times. Each rotation, Pasang noticed something concerning. Sarah's recovery time was slower than expected. Her appetite was decreasing. Her oxygen saturation at rest was dropping. None of this was unusual for Everest. Acclimatization affects everyone differently. But combined, the signs suggested Sarah's body was struggling more than average. A premium expedition would have noticed. A premium expedition had medical staff, daily health checks, blood oxygen monitoring. Himalayan summit expeditions had none of this. Pasang reported his concerns to Dawa Sherpa via radio on April 28th. He said Sarah needed additional acclimatization time. He recommended delaying her summit push by 5 days. Dawa's response: the weather window was opening on May 21st. All clients would summit on May 22nd. There was no flexibility. Pasang pushed back. He described Sarah's symptoms in detail. He said she was at higher risk of HACI, high-altitude cerebral edema, if pushed too fast. Dawa told him to stop diagnosing clients. He wasn't a doctor. His job was to guide, not to question the schedule. This conversation was the first of 3 warnings Pasang would give. All 3 would be ignored. And each time, Pasang faced the same impossible choice: follow orders from an employer who controlled his career, or refuse and risk never working as a climbing Sherpa again. The Sherpa guiding industry in Nepal operates on reputation and relationships. Guides who challenge operators get blacklisted. Guides who refuse assignments don't get future work. Pasang was 19, supporting his mother and 2 younger siblings. His father had died of a heart attack in 2016. The family depended on his income, so Pasang did what generations of Sherpas before him had done. He followed orders while quietly trying to mitigate the damage. He gave Sarah extra rest breaks without reporting them. He shared his personal oxygen during difficult sections. He watched her more closely than his job required. But there are limits to what one person can do when the entire system is designed to fail. On May 18th, 4 days before Sarah's death, Pasang examined the oxygen equipment assigned to their summit push. What he found should have ended the expedition immediately. Sarah's primary oxygen cylinder showed corrosion around the valve. The regulator had visible wear. The backup cylinder, standard on premium expeditions, optional on budget ones, didn't exist. Sarah had been assigned 1 cylinder for the entire summit push. If anything went wrong with that cylinder above the death zone, she would have no backup. Pasang photographed the equipment on his phone. He sent the photos to Dawa with a message. Primary cylinder compromised. Request replacement before summit push. Dawa's response came 6 hours later. Cylinder passed inspection in Kathmandu. Continue as planned. Pasang sent a second message. Visual corrosion on valve. Client safety at risk. Dawa did not respond. On May 20th, the night before the summit push began, Pasang made his final attempt. He called Dawa directly, an unusual step that would cost him money on his satellite phone. The call lasted 4 minutes. Pasang would later describe it in detail to investigators. He told Dawa that Sarah was showing continued signs of altitude stress. He told him the oxygen equipment was compromised. He told him that sending Sarah to the summit with this equipment, in this condition, with a guide of his experience level, was asking for a disaster. Dawa's response: she paid for a summit attempt. She gets a summit attempt. If you can't handle it, I'll find someone who can. Pasang understood the threat, refused the assignment, and he would never work for Himalayan summit expeditions again. More than that, Dawa had connections across the industry. A bad reference could end Pasang's career before it started. Pasang agreed to continue. But he made one request. If Sarah showed any deterioration above the South Kernel, he would have the authority to turn her around without consulting Dawa. Dawa agreed to this, or said he did. The summit push began at 9 p.m. on May 21, 2019. What happened over the next 26 hours would kill Sarah Nguyen, destroy Pasang Dorche's body, and expose a system that had been killing climbers for years. If you want to understand exactly how Sarah died, you need to understand the mountain she was climbing. Not its history, but its mechanics. The death zone. The oxygen deficit. The window between survival and death that shrinks with every minute above 8,000 meters. That's where we're going next. Into the night. Into the cold. Into the hours where every decision becomes life or death. Subscribe now if you want to see the full story. Because what happened at the Hillary Step, what really happened, is something the expedition company has never publicly admitted. And Pasang Dorje, the teenager who lost both legs trying to save a woman he'd known for 5 weeks, is finally ready to tell his side. Chapter 2. 2 Lives Before the Mountain. Sarah Nguyen was born in 1985 in Footscray, a suburb of Melbourne that her parents had chosen specifically because it wasn't Saigon. Her mother and father had fled Vietnam in 1982, 3 years before Sarah was born. They'd paid smugglers to get them onto a fishing boat with 47 other refugees. The journey took 11 days. 9 people died. Dehydration, exposure, 1 suicide. Sarah's mother was pregnant during the crossing, but lost the baby somewhere in the South China Sea. They never talked about it. Not when Sarah was a child. Not when she was an adult. The only evidence that any of it had happened was a single photograph her mother kept in a locked drawer, the fishing boat, taken from the deck of the Australian naval vessel that rescued them. 47 people had started. 38 survived. The photograph showed all of them standing on the deck, and Sarah's mother always said the same thing when Sarah asked about it. We made it. That's what matters. Sarah understood, even as a child, that survival was not passive. Survival required decision-making under pressure. It required trusting some people and refusing to trust others. It required understanding that the world would not save you. You had to save yourself. This understanding shaped everything about who she became. She was not a natural athlete. She was short, 5 feet 2 inches, and had struggled with asthma as a child. In primary school, she finished last in every cross-country race. Her parents didn't understand why she kept entering. Her mother wanted her to focus on academics. Her father wanted her to study medicine or law, something that would guarantee stability. But Sarah kept running, and by year 10, she wasn't finishing last anymore. She was finishing middle of the pack. By year 12, she was finishing in the top third, not because she had become faster than everyone else, because she had become more stubborn. Her university friends described her the same way: methodical, patient, relentless. She didn't cram for exams. She studied 3 hours every day starting 6 weeks before. She didn't panic when things went wrong. She made lists. She worked through the lists. She trusted the process. When she decided to become a teacher, her father was disappointed. Teachers didn't make money. Teachers didn't have status. But Sarah had made up her mind. And once Sarah made up her mind, the conversation was over. She started at Northcote Primary School in 2010. By 2019, she had been there 9 years. Her students loved her. Parents requested her specifically. She had a reputation for taking struggling kids and turning them around, not through inspiration, but through structure. She gave them systems. She taught them to trust the systems. And the systems worked. The climbing started almost by accident. In 2014, a colleague invited her on a weekend hike to Mount Kosciuszko. Sarah had never hiked before. She didn't own hiking boots. She borrowed everything: pack, poles, jacket, and spent the drive up reading about altitude and hydration. The summit was 228 meters. The hike took 6 hours. Sarah's lungs burned the entire way. Her legs cramped. Her borrowed boots gave her blisters that bled through her socks. And when she reached the top, something changed. She would describe it later as recognition. Not euphoria, not triumph. Recognition. Standing on the highest point in Australia, she recognized herself. This was what she was supposed to be doing. This was the thing she hadn't known she was looking for. Within 2 months, she had her own gear. Within a year, she had summited Mount Kosciuszko 3 more times and was planning her first international climb, Kilimanjaro. Her approach to mountaineering was identical to her approach to everything else: methodical, patient, relentless. She didn't rush. She didn't take shortcuts. She read every book, watched every documentary, studied every accident report. When other climbers talked about conquering mountains, Sarah talked about surviving them. Kilimanjaro in 2016, Aconcagua in 2017, Denali in 2018. Each summit took a year of preparation. Each one pushed her further than the last. She never got sick above base camp. She never had to turn back. She never made a single decision she later regretted. Her system worked. And she trusted the system. The Everest decision came in October 2018, 4 months after Denali. She was 33 years old. She had no husband, no children, no mortgage. Just a rental apartment in Northcote, a stable teaching job, and $47,000 in savings accumulated over 7 years. The premium Everest expeditions wanted more than her entire savings. The mid-range operators wanted most of it, leaving her nothing for emergencies. She spent 3 weeks researching alternatives, and that's when she found Himalayan summit expeditions. $22,000 all-inclusive. The website looked professional. The testimonials were positive. The price was less than half what she'd expected. Sarah wasn't stupid. She knew the price was low. She asked the obvious question in her first email to the company: "How are you able to offer such competitive pricing?" The response came from Dawa Sherpa himself. He explained that Himalayan Summit Expeditions was locally owned and operated. They didn't have overseas offices or marketing budgets. They didn't pay commissions to booking agents. They didn't mark up equipment. The savings were passed directly to clients. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like the kind of value Sarah had been trained her whole life to seek. Her parents had survived a refugee boat. They had built a life in Australia by avoiding waste, finding deals, and never paying more than necessary. Sarah wired the money on December 3, 2018. She told her parents she was going to Everest. Her mother cried. Her father said nothing for a long time, then asked a single question: "Do you trust the people taking you there?" Sarah said yes. She had no reason to say anything else. But the people taking her there had already decided, before she'd even arrived in Nepal, that her life was worth less than a premium client's. Because that's how the budget system works. It doesn't kill climbers through malice. It kills them through math. Now let me tell you about the person assigned to keep her alive. Pasung Dorje was born in 1999 in Kumjung, a village of 1,800 people perched at 3,790 meters in the shadow of Everest. His first memory was watching helicopters. They came almost every season: rescue flights, supply drops, medical evacuations. The sound of rotors was as familiar to him as birdsong. His father, Mingma Dorje, was one of the most respected climbing Sherpas in the Khumbu region. He had summited Everest 4 times by the time Pasung was old enough to understand what that meant. He had also buried 3 friends on the mountain. One to avalanche, one to falls, one to a heart attack at Camp 4. Mingma never romanticized climbing. He talked about it the way a factory worker talks about the factory. It was the job, it paid the bills, it was dangerous, and someone had to do it. When foreign journalists asked him about the spiritual connection between Sherpas and Everest, he laughed. "The mountain doesn't know we exist," he said. "We know it exists. That's the only relationship." Pasung grew up understanding that the family business was death-adjacent. Every spring, his father left for 2 months. Every spring, there was a chance he wouldn't come back. The family prepared for this the way farmers prepare for drought, not with fear, but with practicality. Savings were maintained. Insurance was paid. The children knew what to do if the worst happened. The worst happened on October 14, 2016. But it wasn't the mountain that killed Mingma Dorje. It was his heart. He was 44 years old, home between seasons, carrying firewood from the forest to the house. He collapsed in the yard. Pasung was the one who found him. He was 17 years old, and he performed CPR for 12 minutes until he understood that his father was gone. The family had savings, they had insurance, they had a plan for exactly this scenario. But plans don't account for grief. They don't account for the specific gravity of becoming the man of the house at 17. They don't account for the way your entire future narrows to a single question: what now? Pasung had been planning to finish secondary school. He had been considering university in Kathmandu, maybe engineering, maybe business. His father had wanted him to have options beyond the mountain, but options cost money. University cost money, and the family's savings wouldn't last forever. 3 months after his father's death, Pasung dropped out of school and started working as a porter on the Everest base camp trek. It was the lowest rung of the climbing industry ladder, carrying 30-kilogram loads for tourists who paid $2,000 to walk where Pasung had walked his entire life. The pay was $15 per day. He was good at it. He was strong for his size, patient with clients, and fluent in English from years of foreign trekkers passing through Kumjung. By 2018, he had graduated to high-altitude porter, carrying loads above base camp for expeditions. The pay was better. The danger was real. But Pasung understood danger. He'd grown up watching his father calculate risks every season. In spring 2018, he got his first opportunity to summit Everest. An expedition needed an extra assistant guide. The pay was $3,000 for the season, more than he'd made in the previous 8 months combined. The catch: he would be assisting a senior Sherpa, not leading clients. His job was to carry oxygen, fix ropes, and learn. He learned. He watched the senior guides manage clients who were too slow, too sick, too stubborn. He watched them make the calculations that kept people alive. When to push, when to rest, when to turn around. He watched one client die at the South Cone, a 52-year-old German man who refused to turn back despite obvious signs of haste. The senior guides had tried to stop him. They had physically blocked his path. He had threatened to report them to his expedition operator if they didn't let him continue. They let him continue. He died 8 hours later, 200 meters from the summit. Pasung asked the senior guide why they hadn't forced the German to turn back. The answer was simple. We advise, we don't decide. The client pays, the client chooses. We carry the body. This was the system Pasung was entering, a system where the client's money bought not just a service but the right to make fatal decisions, where Sherpas were legally and professionally prohibited from overruling the people paying them, where the only power guides had was the power of recommendation, and recommendations could be ignored. Pasung summited Everest on May 16, 2018, at 5:47 a.m. He was 18 years old. He spent 4 minutes at the top, took 3 photographs, and began the descent. There was no celebration. The German man's body was still visible at the South Cone. The summit was just another waypoint in a job that was far from over. When the season ended, Pasang had a decision to make. He could continue as an assistant guide, safe, steady, limited income. Or he could pursue full guide certification and start leading clients himself. The certification required one summit, which he now had. It required a course in Kathmandu, which he could afford. And it required an expedition operator willing to hire him. Dawa Sherpa was willing. Himalayan summit expeditions needed guides. They paid less than premium operators, $2, $500 per season, instead of $5,000 or more. But they also asked fewer questions. They didn't require extensive experience. They didn't demand references. They needed bodies. And Pasang was a body. Pasang signed a contract in February 2019. He would guide 2 clients during the spring season. One was a 41-year-old Dutch businessman named Eric Vanderberg. The other was a 34-year-old Australian teacher named Sarah Nguyen. Pasang asked about their experience levels. Dawa said both were qualified. Pasang asked about their health screenings. Dawa said both had provided medical clearances. Pasang asked about the equipment they would be using. Dawa said the equipment was adequate. Pasang should have asked more questions. He would spend the rest of his life knowing that. But he was 19 years old, and this was his first real job as a lead guide. And Dawa Sherpa had been in the industry for 15 years. The power imbalance was absolute. Questioning Dawa felt like questioning gravity. When Pasang met Sarah at base camp on April 15, 2019, he liked her immediately. She was calm. She was prepared. She asked intelligent questions about the route, the weather patterns, the acclimatization schedule. She treated Pasang as a professional, not a servant, a distinction many Western climbers failed to make. She also told him something that would haunt him for years. On their second day at base camp, sitting outside her tent, watching clouds form over the Khumbu icefall, Sarah told Pasang why she was really climbing Everest. "My parents survived a refugee boat," she said. 9 people died on that crossing. My mother lost a baby. They never talked about it, but I grew up knowing that I exist because they made impossible decisions under pressure. Every choice they made was life or death. Every day on that boat was survival." She looked at Pasang. "I've never had to survive anything." "Not really. My life has been comfortable, safe. I teach children, I pay rent. I go to the gym. Nothing I do actually matters in the way their choices mattered." Pasang didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. "I'm not climbing Everest to prove anything to anyone else," Sarah continued. "I'm climbing because I want to know if I have what they had, the thing that kept them alive when other people died. I want to know if it's inside me too." Pasang would remember this conversation on May 22, 2019, when he was lying in the snow at 700 meters, his legs frozen, watching Sarah's body cool in the darkness. He would remember thinking, she had it. Whatever her parents had, she had it too. It just wasn't enough. The next 3 weeks at base camp followed a standard pattern. Acclimatization rotations, weather briefings, equipment checks. Sarah performed adequately. Not exceptionally, but adequately. Her oxygen saturation was on the low end of normal. Her appetite decreased with altitude, which was expected. Her energy levels fluctuated. Pasang noted everything. He reported his observations to Dawa. And Dawa told him the same thing every time. "She's fine. Stay on schedule." The other client, Eric Vanderberg, was having different problems. He was fast and strong, a former competitive cyclist, but he was also impatient and dismissive. He questioned Pasang's decisions constantly. He ignored rest recommendations. He wanted to summit as quickly as possible because he had business obligations back in Amsterdam. Eric was assigned a different guide, a 34-year-old Sherpa named Nima Tashi, who had summited Everest 7 times. Nima was more experienced than Pasang, more confident, more willing to push back against difficult clients. But even Nima couldn't control Eric entirely. The 2 clients would summit on the same push, the same night, the same weather window, and their fates would intersect at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible place, in the worst possible way. But before any of that could happen, there was one more warning, one more chance to prevent everything that followed, and one more decision that sealed Sarah Nguyen's fate. The oxygen cylinders were inspected on May 18th. What Pasang found, and what Dawa chose to ignore, would kill Sarah 5 days later. That inspection, those photographs that ignored warning. This is where we go next, because the disaster at the Hillary Step didn't happen because of bad luck. It happened because a man in Kathmandu decided that old, corroded oxygen equipment was good enough for a $22,000 client. Chapter 3. The system that killed her on May 18, 2019, at 2:14 p.m. Nepal time. Pasang Dore photographed 5 oxygen cylinders. The photographs would later become evidence in a lawsuit that Sarah Nguyen's family filed against Himalayan summit expeditions. But on that afternoon, Pasang wasn't thinking about legal proceedings. He was thinking about rust. The cylinders were Poisk brand, Russian-made, standard equipment for budget expeditions across the Himalayas. Premium operators used newer top-out or summit oxygen systems. Budget operators used what they could get. Himalayan summit expeditions used Poisk cylinders that had been in rotation since 2012, 7 years. The recommended service life for high-altitude oxygen cylinders is 5 years. After that, metal fatigue, valve corrosion, and regulator wear make failure increasingly likely. Not guaranteed, but likely enough that no premium expedition would accept the risk. Sarah's assigned cylinder, the one she would carry to the summit and depend on above 8,000 meters, showed visible corrosion around the valve stem. The threading was worn. The regulator clicked when Pasang rotated it, suggesting internal damage. The backup cylinder, standard on premium expeditions, mandatory for any responsible operator, didn't exist. Sarah had been assigned one cylinder for the entire summit push. One cylinder containing approximately 8 hours of supplemental oxygen at standard flow rate. The summit push would take between 16 and 20 hours. Pasang did the math immediately. Even if the cylinder functioned perfectly, Sarah would run out of oxygen somewhere above the South Col. The plan, apparently, was to reduce her flow rate during the descent, a common practice that worked fine when nothing went wrong. When something went wrong, reduced flow meant reduced margin. And on Everest, margin was everything. He photographed the corrosion. He photographed the worn threading. He photographed the regulator. He sent all 5 images to Dawa Sherpa via satellite messenger with a text message. Primary cylinder compromised. Request replacement before summit push. Dawa's response arrived 6 hours later, after Pasang had eaten dinner, checked the weather forecast, and walked Sarah through the summit push timeline. Cylinder passed inspection in Kathmandu. Continue as planned. Pasang read the message 3 times. He understood what it meant. The cylinder had been inspected somewhere, at some point, by someone whose standards allowed 7-year-old equipment with visible corrosion to pass. The inspection meant nothing. The message meant everything. There would be no replacement. He sent a second message. Visual corrosion on valve. Client safety at risk. No response. He waited 2 hours. He walked to the communication tent and tried to make a satellite call. Dawa didn't answer. He sent a third message. Please confirm receipt. Equipment concern, urgent. Nothing. By midnight, Pasang understood that he was alone. Dawa was not going to replace the cylinder. Dawa was not going to take responsibility. Dawa was going to let Sarah summit with compromised equipment, and if something went wrong, Dawa would blame the guide. This was the system. Pasang had watched it operate from the porter level. Now he was inside it, understanding for the first time how it actually worked. Budget expeditions survived on volume. Premium operators took 12 to 15 clients per season and charged $65,000 each. Budget operators took 40 to 60 clients and charged $22,000 each. The revenue was comparable. The costs were not. Premium operators spent money on equipment replacement, medical staff, experienced guides, backup systems, emergency protocols. Budget operators spent money on marketing, permit fees, and basic supplies. The margin between those two approaches was human life. But here's what most people don't understand. Budget expeditions don't kill everyone. They don't even kill most people. In good weather, with healthy clients, with a little bit of luck, budget climbers summit and return without incident. The statistics look acceptable. The testimonials are genuine. The website photographs are real. The system doesn't fail every time. It fails specifically when conditions are imperfect, when clients are vulnerable, when equipment malfunctions at exactly the wrong moment. Budget expeditions aren't designed to kill climbers. They're designed to accept a higher probability of climber death in exchange for higher profit margins. That probability caught Sarah Ngin on May 22, 2019, but she wasn't the first. In 2016, a 38-year-old British climber named James Hartley died at Camp 4 during a Himalayan summit expeditions climb. Official cause of death: HACE, high-altitude cerebral edema. The investigation noted that Hartley had shown symptoms of altitude sickness for 2 days before his death, but had continued climbing on the advice of his guide. No equipment was examined. No questions were asked about the expedition's protocols. In 2017, a 45-year-old Korean climber named Park Sun-ho fell during descent near the balcony, approximately 400 meters. He was not roped. Official cause of death: fall during descent. The investigation noted that Park had been descending unassisted because his assigned Sherpa was helping another client who had collapsed from exhaustion. No questions were asked about staffing ratios or client-to-guide assignments. 2 deaths in 3 years. Both listed as accidents or altitude-related illness. Both attributable, at least partially, to decisions made by Himalayan summit expeditions. Neither investigation examined the expedition's equipment, protocols, or practices. The families weren't told. Sarah wasn't told. Pasang wasn't told. This information would emerge later, during the lawsuit, when Sarah's family's attorneys subpoenaed records from the Nepal Ministry of Tourism. The records showed that Himalayan summit expeditions had received 3 warnings from ministry inspectors between 2015 and 2018. 2 warnings related to equipment age. 1 warning related to guide experience levels. All 3 warnings were administrative. No penalties were imposed. No expeditions were suspended. The ministry's enforcement budget was $47,000 per year, enough to inspect approximately 8% of permitted expeditions. Himalayan summit expeditions had never been inspected. Dawa Sherpa knew all of this. He had been operating in this regulatory vacuum for 7 years. He understood that the probability of accountability was low. He understood that clients like Sarah, experienced enough to climb, inexperienced enough to trust, were his ideal customers. He understood that the system protected operators, not climbers. And on May 18, 2019, when Pasang Dorje sent photographs of corroded oxygen equipment, Dawa understood something else. Replacing the cylinder would cost $400. Not replacing it would cost nothing, unless something went wrong. And even if something went wrong, the system would protect him. He was almost right. On May 20th, the night before the summit push, Pasang made his final attempt to prevent what was coming. He borrowed a satellite phone from Nima Tashi, the guide assigned to Eric Vanderberg, and called Dawa directly. The call connected at 7:34 p.m. It lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Pasang would later provide a detailed account of the conversation to investigators. "I told him Sarah's acclimatization had been slow," Pasang said. "I told him her oxygen saturation was consistently lower than other clients. I told him she was a higher risk for altitude illness, especially HACE. And I told him again about the cylinder, the corrosion, the worn threading, the regulator that clicked." Dawa listened without interrupting. When Pasang finished, there was a pause. "She paid for a summit attempt," Dawa said. "She gets a summit attempt." "She paid for a safe expedition," Pasang replied. "The equipment is not safe. The equipment passed inspection. The inspection was wrong." Another pause. Then Dawa's voice changed. It became colder, more direct. "You are a first-year guide. You have 1 summit. I have been doing this for 15 years. If you cannot handle this assignment, I will find someone who can. And I will make sure everyone in this industry knows why." Pasang understood the threat. A bad reference from Dawa Sherpa would end his career before it started. No other operator would hire him. He would go back to carrying 30-kilogram loads for $15 per day. His mother, his siblings, everything depended on this job. He made a choice. The wrong choice, he would later say. The only choice available, others would argue. "If she shows any deterioration above the South Cone," Pasang said, "I need authority to turn her around without consulting you." "Fine. Dawa said. But she reaches the South Colonel? Understood? Understood. The call ended. Pasang returned the satellite phone to Nimatashi. He walked back to his tent. He did not sleep. The summit push began at 9:47 p.m. on May 21, 2019. Sarah emerged from her tent at 9:30 p.m., already wearing her summit suit, her boots, her harness. Pasang helped her check her equipment. Crampon secure, oxygen mask fitted, headlamp tested. She was calm, focused. The weeks of acclimatization had prepared her for this moment, and she was ready. "How do you feel?" Pasang asked. "Nervous," Sarah admitted, "but good nervous. Like before a race." "Your oxygen?" She adjusted the mask. "Flowing. Feels normal." The primary cylinder was strapped to her pack. The cylinder that Pasang had photographed 3 days earlier. The cylinder with corroded threading and a clicking regulator. There was no backup. Pasang was carrying his own oxygen cylinder plus additional supplies. Ropes, emergency equipment, a thermos of warm tea. His pack weighed 18 kilograms. Sarah's pack weighed 12 kilograms. She would add the weight of the oxygen cylinder, another 4 kilograms, for a total load of 16 kilograms on the summit push. They were joined by 4 other climbers from the expedition, Eric Vanderberg and Nimatashi, a 29-year-old Japanese climber named Yuki Tanaka and her guide, a veteran Sherpa named Dorhei Lama. The 6 of them would climb together through the night, sharing fixed ropes and the narrow passages that made Everest's summit approach both crowded and dangerous. The weather was clear, the wind was light. The forecast showed stable conditions through the following afternoon. If everything went perfectly, they would summit around 8 a.m. and return to the South Col by 4 p.m. Everything did not go perfectly. The first sign of trouble came at 1:15 a.m., at approximately 200 meters, on the approach to the balcony. Sarah stopped moving. Pasang, climbing behind her, nearly collided with her backpack before realizing she had frozen in place. "Sarah?" She didn't respond. Pasang moved beside her, shining his headlamp at her face. Her eyes were open. Her breathing was rapid. Her oxygen mask was in place, but something was wrong with her expression. "Sarah, can you hear me?" She turned her head slowly, her eyes focused on Pasang. She blinked. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was muffled by the mask. "I just needed a moment." "What happened?" "I don't know. I felt disconnected, like I wasn't inside my own body." Pasang recognized the description. It was a common early symptom of hypoxia, insufficient oxygen reaching the brain. At 200 meters, even with supplemental oxygen, the body operated at the edge of its tolerances. Brief episodes of disorientation were normal. Extended episodes were not. "How do you feel now?" "Better. Clear." "Your oxygen flow?" Sarah checked the regulator. 4 liters per minute. Same as before. Pasang checked it himself. The gauge showed 4 liters per minute. But he noticed something else. The flow seemed irregular. Not a steady stream, but a stuttering pulse. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. They had no backup cylinder. Turning around at 200 meters would mean abandoning the summit attempt, returning to the South Colonel, and either trying again with the same compromised equipment, or admitting that the expedition had failed. Sarah had paid $22,000. She had prepared for 14 months. She had told her students she was going to try. She had told Pasang about her parents' refugee boat, about wanting to know if she had what they had, and the regulator was probably fine. The stuttering might be normal at this altitude. The disorientation episode might be ordinary hypoxia. Everything might be fine. Pasang made a decision. "We continue," he said. "But if this happens again, we turn around. Agreed?" "Agreed." They resumed climbing. The balcony came into view at 1:47 a.m. Sarah reached it without further incident. Her pace was slow but steady. Her breathing was labored but controlled. The disorientation episode did not recur. Pasang allowed himself to hope. The hope lasted until 4:30 a.m. when they reached the south summit at 749 meters, and Sarah's oxygen regulator failed completely. The failure was silent. There was no warning, no alarm, no dramatic malfunction. The regulator simply stopped delivering oxygen. One moment Sarah was breathing supplemental air. The next moment she was breathing the thin, killing atmosphere of the death zone. She didn't notice immediately. The mask was still on her face. The sensation of breathing felt normal. But within 3 minutes, her blood oxygen saturation dropped from 82% to 61%. Her heart rate spiked. Her vision narrowed. She stopped climbing again. "Pasang?" Her voice was different now. Thinner. More distant. "Pasang, something's wrong." He turned and saw her swaying. She was 47 meters below the Hillary Step. The summit was 97 meters above that. In terms of climbing difficulty, they had completed 95% of the ascent. In terms of survival, they had just entered the worst possible scenario. What happened next would determine whether Sarah Nguyen lived or died. And Pasang Dorje, 19 years old, one previous summit, a career that depended on this moment, had approximately 4 minutes to make a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Hillary Step was waiting. The oxygen was gone. And the sun wouldn't rise for another hour. That hour, and everything that happened in it, is where we go next. Chapter 4. The Hillary Step. At 4:33 a.m. on May 22, 2019, Sarah Nguyen stopped being a climber. She became a patient. Pasang reached her in 11 seconds. He grabbed her arm to stabilize her. She was still standing, but barely. Her weight had shifted backward. Without support, she would have fallen. "My mask," she said. "Something's wrong with my mask." Pasang pulled off his gloves. His fingers were already cold. The temperature was minus 34 degrees Celsius with wind chill. He had maybe 3 minutes of dexterity before his hands became useless. He examined the mask. It was sealed correctly. The tube was connected. The regulator appeared functional. But nothing was coming out. He traced the tube back to the cylinder. The valve was open. The pressure gauge showed adequate supply. Everything looked correct. But no oxygen was flowing. The regulator had failed. Somewhere inside the mechanism with corroded threading that Pasang had photographed 4 days earlier, something had broken. "Your oxygen's not working," Pasang said. He kept his voice calm. Panic was contagious at altitude. "We need to switch to mine." He unslung his own cylinder. The transfer would take approximately 2 minutes. During those 2 minutes, Sarah would breathe ambient air at 749 meters. The oxygen content at that altitude was approximately 1/3 of sea level. 2 minutes without supplemental oxygen would not kill her. But it would weaken her further. "Breathe slow," he said. "Conserve everything." He disconnected his regulator and attached it to Sarah's mask. The connection was awkward. Different fittings, designed for a different face shape, but it worked. Air began flowing. Sarah's eyes refocused. "Better," she said. "I can think again." But Pasang was already calculating the problem. He now had no supplemental oxygen for himself. His cylinder was keeping Sarah alive. His own breathing was unassisted. At 749 meters without supplemental oxygen, a healthy climber had approximately 2 to 4 hours of effective functioning before hypoxia degraded their judgment, coordination, and eventually their consciousness. They were 97 meters from the summit. Summit time, maybe 1 hour. Descent from summit to south summit, 45 minutes. Descent from south summit to south Konim, 4 to 5 hours. Minimum time without oxygen for Pasang, 6 to 7 hours. He might survive. He might not. He would certainly be impaired. But there was a worse option. Leave Sarah here and descend to get help. By the time help arrived, if help could arrive, she would be dead. No climber survived multiple hours without oxygen at this altitude. None. The mountain had killed dozens of people in exactly this way. Pasang made his choice. He would continue. He would get Sarah to the summit if she wanted to go. He would get her down if she chose to descend, and he would do it without supplemental oxygen, trusting his acclimatization, his conditioning, and his youth. It was the kind of decision his father would have made, the kind of decision that had killed his uncle. "Can you continue?" Pasang asked. Sarah looked up at the Hillary step. The rock formation loomed above them, illuminated by headlamps. Two other climbers were already ascending, Eric Vanderberg and Nimatashi, unaware of the emergency below them. "I want to summit," Sarah said. "I came here to summit. You understand the risk?" "I understand. If you feel worse at any point, we turn around immediately." "Agreed." They began climbing. The Hillary step is not technically difficult. In good conditions, with supplemental oxygen, it's a moderate rock scramble. Experienced climbers ascend it in 15 to 20 minutes. Sarah took 47 minutes. Her pace had slowed dramatically. Each movement required deliberate effort. She would grab a handhold, pause, gather strength, pull herself up. Repeat. Every 3 or 4 movements, she would stop completely, breathing hard, her chest heaving against the supplemental oxygen that was barely keeping her conscious. Pasang climbed beside her. He used his hands to stabilize her when she swayed. He coached her breathing. He watched for the signs of severe hypoxia, confusion, combativeness, loss of coordination, that would signal she was too far gone to continue. The signs didn't appear. Sarah was suffering, but she was functional. Her judgment remained intact. Her movements were slow but purposeful. Above them, Eric Vanderberg and Nimatashi reached the summit at 5:41 a.m. They spent 6 minutes there, took photographs, and began descending. At 5:52 a.m. they passed Sarah and Pasang on the Hillary step. Eric glanced at them but didn't stop. Nima paused. "Everything okay?" Pasang shook his head. "Oxygen failure. Clients on my supply. I'm unassisted." Nima's expression changed. He understood immediately what this meant. "You need to get her down," he said. "Now. She wants to summit. She's going to die if she doesn't descend. She understands the risk." Nima looked at Sarah. She was 10 meters below them, still climbing, still moving upward. "Does she?" Nima said. "Or does she think she understands? There's a difference up here." It was a fair question. Hypoxia impaired judgment. Climbers at extreme altitude often believed they were thinking clearly when they were actually confused. Sarah had been without supplemental oxygen for 2 minutes before Pasang's cylinder reached her. The effects might be subtle. She might not recognize her own impairment, but Pasang had asked her directly. She had chosen to continue. "I can't force her to descend," Pasang said. "The client decides." Nima stared at him for a long moment. "Your client. Your responsibility." He continued descending. Eric followed without a word. The exchange had taken approximately 90 seconds. In that time, Pasang's own oxygen deprivation had progressed. His head was beginning to throb. The edges of his vision were darkening. He recognized the symptoms. He kept climbing. Sarah reached the top of the Hillary step at 6:31 a.m. The summit was 50 meters ahead, a gentle snow ridge that would take perhaps 20 minutes to traverse. She stopped. "I don't feel right," she said. Pasang moved beside her. Her face was visible in the growing dawn light. Her lips were blue. Her eyes were unfocused. "What do you feel?" "Heavy, like I'm moving through water." She paused. "And I'm having trouble remembering." "Remembering what?" "Why I'm here." Pasang's stomach dropped. Confusion about purpose was a severe symptom. It indicated that oxygen deprivation was affecting her higher cognitive functions. She was deteriorating. "We're going down," he said. "Now." Sarah didn't argue. She nodded. "Okay." They began the descent. The Hillary step is harder going down than going up. The exposure is more visible. The handholds are less intuitive. And Sarah was now moving at perhaps 1/3 her already slow pace. At 6:47 a.m., 16 minutes into the descent, she stopped moving entirely. "Sarah?" No response. "Sarah, can you hear me?" She was standing, but her eyes were closed. Her breathing was shallow. She wasn't unconscious. Unconscious people don't stand, but she was approaching it. Pasang grabbed both her shoulders. "Sarah, look at me." "Sarah." Her eyes opened. She looked at him. Recognition appeared slowly, like sunlight through fog. "Pasang, we need to keep moving. I'm tired." "I know, we need to keep moving anyway. Can we rest?" "No. Not here. We rest lower." Sarah nodded. She took one step, then another. Then she collapsed. Her legs simply stopped working. She fell forward, and Pasang caught her, and they both went down into the snow. The impact drove the air from his lungs. For a moment, neither of them moved. When Pasang recovered, he tried to lift Sarah to her feet. She couldn't stand. Her legs wouldn't support her weight. "Sarah, I need you to help me." "I can't." "You can." "I can't feel my legs." Pasang looked at her boots. They were still secured. Her crampons were still attached, but her legs were motionless. This was not hypoxia. This was HACE, high-altitude cerebral edema. Her brain was swelling. The edema was pressing on the motor control centers. She was losing function, and without descent and treatment she would die. Pasang did the only thing he could do. He began dragging her. He hooked his arms under hers and pulled. The snow was deep enough to create resistance. Each meter took 30 seconds. At this pace, reaching the South Cone would take approximately 36 hours. Sarah would be dead in 6. At 7:04 a.m., Pasang stopped dragging. He was exhausted. His own hypoxia was severe now. Headache, nausea, confusion at the edges. He couldn't continue alone. He activated his emergency beacon. The beacon was supposed to alert Himalayan summit expeditions that a climber was in distress. It transmitted GPS coordinates and a pre-programmed message. Medical emergency. Immediate assistance required. The beacon transmitted. A response did not come. What Pasang didn't know. The beacon's signal reached base camp at 7:08 a.m. The operator on duty, a 24-year-old assistant named Suresh Tamang, received the alert and immediately contacted Dawa Sherpa in Kathmandu. Dawa's response: "What's the altitude?" Suresh checked the coordinates. Approximately 700 meters. Below the Hillary Step. "Can they self-evacuate?" The message says medical emergency. A pause. Then, contact the Sherpa support team at Camp 4. Tell them to stand by. Stand by? Shouldn't they ascend? At 700 meters? Do you know how long that would take? And the risk? She's having a medical emergency. Then her guide should handle it. That's what we pay him for. The support team at Camp 4 was never mobilized. They received no instructions until 2:47 p.m., nearly 8 hours later, by which time Sarah Nguyen had been dead for approximately 4 hours. At 7:15 a.m., Yuki Tanaka and her guide, Dorje Lama, reached Pasang and Sarah during their summit descent. They had summited at 6:22 a.m. and were making good time down. Dorje assessed the situation immediately. His 25 years of experience told him everything he needed to know. "She's HACE," he said. "Without evacuation, she has maybe 3 hours. I know. Can you carry her?" "Not alone. I can help for 30 minutes. Then I need to continue with my client." "I understand." For the next 34 minutes, Dorje and Pasang worked together. They created an improvised rescue sled using their packs and rope. They loaded Sarah onto it. They began sliding her down the route, one agonizing meter at a time. At 7:49 a.m., Dorje stopped. "I have to go," he said. "Yuki's getting cold." Pasang nodded. He was grateful for the help. He didn't blame Dorje for leaving. "Tell base camp," he said. "Tell them we need helicopters, doctors, anything." "I'll tell them." Dorje and Yuki descended. They reached Camp 4 at 10:15 a.m. Dorje immediately contacted base camp and reported the emergency. The response he received: "We're aware. We're evaluating options." Dorje demanded to know what that meant. The operator, Suresh Tamang, said he had been instructed by Dawa Sherpa to wait for clearer information about the situation. Dorje called Dawa directly. "There's a woman dying at 700 meters, he said. "Your guide is alone with her. Why isn't your support team ascending?" "The weather might change." "The weather is clear. There's risk involved." "There's risk in everything. That's not a reason. Dawa's response would later become central to the lawsuit. She's a budget client. She signed a waiver. She understood the limitations of the expedition. I'm not going to risk my other employees for a situation that can't be changed. Dorje reported this conversation to the Nepal Ministry of Tourism during the subsequent investigation. Dawa denied making the statement. But Dorje had recorded the call. The recording was played during the lawsuit deposition. The jury heard Dawa Sherpa explain, in his own words, why he chose not to rescue Sarah Nguyen. But all of that came later. On May 22, 2019, at 7:49 a.m., all Pasang knew was that he was alone again. He continued dragging Sarah down the mountain. His oxygen deprivation was severe. His fingers were numb. His legs were failing. But he kept pulling. At 8:47 a.m., he collapsed. His body simply stopped responding. He fell face first into the snow beside Sarah. The cold pressed against his face. His eyes closed. When he opened them again, it was 9:14 a.m. He had lost 27 minutes. Sarah was beside him. She wasn't moving. Her eyes were open, but they didn't track his hand when he waved it in front of her face. "Sarah?" Nothing. He pressed his fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse. His fingers were too numb to feel anything. He pulled off his glove and tried again. There. Faint. Slow. But present. She was still alive. Pasang tried to stand. His legs wouldn't cooperate. He got to his knees, then fell again. The oxygen deprivation had taken too much. His body was shutting down. He crawled beside Sarah. He wrapped his arms around her. If they were going to die, they would die together. At 10:43 a.m., the first rescue team reached them. It was not a Himalayan summit expeditions team. It was a group of 4 Sherpas from a rival expedition, led by a guide named Ang Chering Sherpa, who had heard about the emergency via radio and decided to help without being asked. They found Pasang semi-conscious and Sarah unresponsive. They immediately began emergency protocols: supplemental oxygen for both, dexamethasone injection for Sarah's brain swelling, warming measures for Pasang's extremities. At 11:15 a.m., Ang Chering radioed base camp. "We have them both. The woman is critical. HACE, non-responsive, weak pulse. The guide is hypothermic and hypoxic but conscious. We need helicopter evacuation." The helicopter arrived at 1:47 p.m. It could only land at the South Col, 700 meters below their current position. The rescue team carried Sarah on a stretcher for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She was loaded onto the helicopter at 4:31 p.m. She died at 4:47 p.m. during the flight to Lukla. The cause of death, according to the medical report, was ACE complicated by hypothermia and oxygen deprivation. She had been without adequate oxygen for approximately 12 hours. Her brain had swelled beyond the point of recovery. The dexamethasone injection had delayed the inevitable, not prevented it. Sarah Nguyen was 34 years old. Pasang Dorje survived, but both his legs had developed severe frostbite during the hours he spent immobile in the snow. At the Lukla Medical Clinic, doctors examined him and delivered the news. Both legs would require amputation below the knee. The amputations were performed on May 27, 2019. Pasang was 19 years old. He would never climb again. The system that killed Sarah Nguyen had now claimed Pasang's legs, and it was about to face the closest thing to accountability it had ever experienced. But accountability, as the Nguyen family would discover, was complicated, because the system was designed to distribute responsibility so widely that no single person could be held liable. Dawa Sherpa blamed the equipment manufacturer. The equipment manufacturer blamed the inspection process. The inspection process blamed the regulatory framework. The regulatory framework blamed limited resources. And everyone blamed Sarah for being inexperienced. Except she wasn't inexperienced. She had 4 major summits. She had prepared for 14 months. She had asked the right questions. The system killed her anyway. Chapter 5. The investigation that almost wasn't Sarah Nguyen's body arrived in Melbourne on June 3, 2019. Her parents met the coffin at the airport. Her mother had aged 10 years and 2 weeks. Her father stood perfectly still, watching the cargo door, waiting for the box that held everything they had left of their daughter. The funeral was held on June 8th at a Vietnamese Buddhist temple in Footscray, the same neighborhood where Sarah had grown up, the same community her parents had built after escaping a refugee boat 37 years earlier. 300 people attended. Her students came with their parents. Her colleagues came with flowers. The climbing community sent representatives from every major club in Victoria. The eulogy was delivered by Sarah's mother, Lin Nguyen, in Vietnamese and English. She spoke about survival, about how the Nguyen family had survived war, survived displacement, survived a leaking fishing boat in the South China Sea, about how Sarah had been their proof that survival meant something, that the next generation could do more than just survive, they could thrive. "My daughter wanted to know if she had what we had," Lin said, "the thing that kept us alive. I told her she didn't need to know. I told her it wasn't something to search for. It finds you when you need it." She paused. Her hands were shaking. "Sarah found it. On that mountain, alone, with nothing left, she kept trying. The young man who was with her told me she never gave up. She kept moving until her body wouldn't let her anymore. She had what we had. She just shouldn't have needed it." The funeral ended with a traditional Vietnamese ritual for the dead. Incense was burned. Offerings were made. Sarah's photograph, taken on the summit of Denali in 2018, her smile wide, her ice axe raised in triumph, was placed on the altar. It would stay there for 49 days. Then, according to tradition, Sarah's soul would move on. But Sarah's family was not ready to move on. They wanted answers. The first call came 3 days after the funeral. Sarah's father, Duke Nguyen, contacted the Nepal Ministry of Tourism and requested information about his daughter's death. The ministry responded with a form letter. It expressed condolences. It explained that deaths on Everest were investigated by local authorities, and that the ministry could provide copies of official reports upon request. Duke requested the reports. 6 weeks later, he received a 2-page document. The official cause of death was listed as, quote, HACE, high-altitude cerebral edema, complicated by hypothermia and oxygen deprivation. The contributing factors were listed as, quote, adverse conditions and delayed rescue. The recommended actions were listed as none at this time. The expedition operator Himalayan Summit Expeditions was mentioned once, in the section identifying the victim's affiliation. No investigation of the operator's practices was included, no examination of the oxygen equipment was conducted, no interviews with witnesses were summarized. Duke Nguyen read the report 3 times. Then, he called a lawyer. The attorney, Michelle Chen, specialized in wrongful death cases with international elements. She had handled cases involving tour operators, cruise lines, and adventure travel companies. She had never handled a mountaineering case. "The problem," she explained to the Nguyen family during their first meeting, "is jurisdiction. Sarah was an Australian citizen who died in Nepal while using a Nepalese company. Nepal doesn't have the same liability standards as Australia or the United States. Their court system is slower, their damage awards are smaller, and their enforcement is weaker." "What about suing them in Australia?" Duck asked. "We'd need to establish that they conducted business in Australia, marketed here, accepted payment here, something that creates a legal connection. If we can establish that, we might be able to bring the case under Australian consumer protection law. They have a website." Sarah found them through a Google search in Melbourne. Michelle nodded. "That might be enough. But we'd need evidence, lots of evidence, about what they promised, what they delivered, and exactly what went wrong." "What kind of evidence?" "Everything. Emails, contracts, payment records, equipment logs, witness testimony, medical records, anything that shows they failed to provide the service they promised." "How do we get that?" "We sue them. Then we use discovery to force them to produce documents." "How long will that take?" "In Nepal, years. In Australia, faster, if we can establish jurisdiction, but still 18 months minimum." The Nguyen family didn't hesitate. They authorized Michelle Chen to begin proceedings. The lawsuit was filed on August 14, 2019 in the Federal Court of Australia. The defendants were Himalayan Summit Expeditions and its owner, Dawa Sherpa. The cause of action was misleading and deceptive conduct under Australian consumer law, combined with wrongful death under common law negligence. The filing received moderate media coverage. Australian newspapers ran stories about, quote, Everest budget death and teacher dies on discount expedition. The climbing community began discussing the case on forums and social media. And then Pasang Dorje contacted Michelle Chen. He had read about the lawsuit in a Nepalese newspaper. He had been recovering from his amputations in Kathmandu, relearning how to move, how to function, how to imagine a future without the mountains that had defined his entire life. When he saw the lawsuit, he knew he had to help. "I have photographs," he told Michelle during their first video call. "The oxygen cylinder Sarah was using. I photographed it 3 days before the summit push. The corrosion. The damage. I sent the photographs to Dawa Sherpa. He told me to continue anyway." Michelle asked if he still had the photographs. "Yes. And the messages you sent to Dawa? I have screenshots." "Can you testify about what Dawa said during your phone call the night before the summit push?" "I remember every word. Would you be willing to provide a formal statement?" Pasang didn't hesitate. "I would be willing to testify in court." Michelle Chen's case had just become much stronger. She had documentary evidence of equipment failure, ignored warnings, and explicit instructions to continue despite known risks. She had a witness who was willing to describe the operator's conduct in detail. But Dawa Sherpa was not going to cooperate. When Himalayan Summit Expeditions was served with the lawsuit, they retained a law firm in Sydney that specialized in defending international companies against Australian litigation. Their defense strategy was predictable but effective. First, they challenged jurisdiction. They argued that Himalayan Summit Expeditions was a Nepalese company with no Australian operations. The website was hosted on international servers. The payments were processed through Nepalese banks. The contract Sarah signed specified that disputes would be resolved under Nepalese law. This challenge consumed 6 months of litigation. Michelle Chen argued that the companies targeted advertising to Australian customers, Google ads, social media campaigns, partnerships with Australian travel agencies, established sufficient connection to Australian jurisdiction. In March 2020, the court agreed. The case would proceed in Australia. Second, they attacked Sarah's conduct. They argued that she was an experienced climber who understood the risks of high-altitude mountaineering. She signed a comprehensive waiver, acknowledging that death was possible. She made the decision to continue climbing despite warnings from her guide. Her death was tragic, but not the result of negligence. Michelle Chen responded with Pasang's testimony. Yes, Sarah chose to continue, but she chose to continue based on incomplete information. She didn't know her oxygen equipment was compromised. She didn't know her guide had requested replacement equipment and been refused. She didn't know that 2 previous clients had died under similar circumstances. If Sarah had known what Himalayan Summit Expeditions knew, she would never have continued climbing. Third, they offered a settlement. In July 2020, Dawa Sherpa's attorneys proposed $150,000 Australian dollars to resolve the case. The settlement would include no admission of wrongdoing, no public statement, and a comprehensive confidentiality agreement. The Ngayan family rejected it. "We don't want money," Duke Nguyen told Michelle Chen. "We want accountability. We want everyone to know what they did. We want to make sure no other family goes through this." The case proceeded to discovery. Discovery is the legal process where parties exchange documents and information. In most cases, it's a formality. Both sides produce what they're required to produce, and the litigation continues. In this case, discovery revealed the truth about Himalayan Summit Expeditions. The company's internal records showed that the oxygen equipment provided to budget clients had not been replaced since 2012. The cylinders Sarah used were 7 years old, 2 years past recommended service life. The regulators had never been professionally serviced. The inspection certificates Dawa referenced in his messages to Pasang were falsified. The records also showed that Himalayan Summit Expeditions knew about the risks. Internal emails from 2017 discussed, quote, equipment concerns and the need to update inventory before someone gets hurt. The emails were written by Dawa Sherpa himself. The update never happened. Instead, Dawa reduced the equipment budget further to accommodate lower pricing and higher client volume. Most damning were the records from previous seasons. James Hartley, the British climber who died of haste in 2016, had been using the same compromised oxygen system. His family had been told he died of altitude sickness. They were never informed that his equipment had malfunctioned. Park Sun-ho, the Korean climber who fell in 2017, had been climbing without adequate Sherpa support because his assigned guide was managing 2 other clients simultaneously. The staffing ratio violated international mountaineering guidelines. The fall was not investigated. Both families had been offered settlements, $50,000 each. Both had accepted. Both had signed confidentiality agreements. Sarah Nguyen was the 3rd death in 4 years. The pattern was undeniable. The trial began on September 12, 2021, in the Federal Court of Australia in Melbourne. It lasted 3 weeks. Pasang Dorje testified via video link from Kathmandu. He sat in his wheelchair, both legs missing below the knee, and described everything that had happened on May 22, 2019. He described photographing the oxygen equipment. He described sending the photographs to Dawa. He described the phone call the night before the summit push, when Dawa threatened his career if he refused the assignment. He described Sarah's collapse. He described dragging her through the snow. He described holding her as they both waited to die. "I tried to save her," Pasang said. "But I was given equipment that could not save anyone. I was given no support. I was given threats instead of help." Sarah trusted the company. "I trusted the company. We were both wrong." The defense attorney asked if Pasang had refused the assignment. "I should have," Pasang replied. "But I was 19 years old. I had no power. Dawa Sherpa controlled my career. He controlled my family's income. Refusing meant destroying everything I had." "So you made a choice," the attorney said. "And that choice contributed to Ms. Nguyen's death." Pasang was silent for a long moment. "I made a choice," he finally said. "I live with that choice every day." But Dawa Sherpa made choices too. He chose to ignore my warnings. He chose to use broken equipment. He chose not to send help when I called for it. My choice was made under pressure he created. His choices were made with full knowledge of the consequences. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On October 5, 2021, they returned a verdict in favor of the Nguyen family. Himalayan Summit Expeditions was found liable for negligence and misleading conduct. Damages were awarded in the amount of $2.3 million Australian dollars. The verdict made international headlines. Budget Everest operator found liable for climber death. Australian court holds Nepalese company accountable. Sherpa's testimony exposes deadly expedition practices. But the victory was incomplete. Himalayan Summit Expeditions declared bankruptcy 2 weeks after the verdict. Dawa Sherpa transferred the company's assets to a new entity, Himalayan Peak Adventures, and continued operating. The $2.3 million judgment would never be collected. The Nguyen family had won accountability. They had exposed the truth. They had created a legal precedent that would protect future climbers. But they had not stopped Dawa Sherpa. And they had not brought Sarah back. What the lawsuit revealed, and what the public still doesn't fully understand, is that Sarah's death was not exceptional. It was systematic. Budget expeditions operate on a model that accepts climber deaths as an acceptable cost of business. Chapter 6. The industry they couldn't kill. The lawsuit against Himalayan Summit Expeditions should have destroyed the budget expedition industry. It didn't. In the spring following the verdict, Nepal issued 408 Everest climbing permits, the most in history. Of those permits, approximately 180 were purchased through budget operators charging less than $30,000. The climbers who bought those permits had read the news. They knew about Sarah Nguyen. They knew about the oxygen equipment. They knew about the Sherpa who lost both legs. They climbed anyway. To understand why, you need to understand the economics of Everest, not from the operator's perspective, but from the climbers. A premium Everest expedition costs $65,000 to $100,000. For most people, that's not a purchase. That's a life-altering financial commitment. Mortgages are refinanced. Retirement accounts are raided. Years of savings are spent. A budget expedition costs $22,000 to $35,000. That's still expensive, but it's within reach. It's a car, not a house. It's ambitious, not impossible. The difference between a $22,000 climb and a $65,000 climb is the same mountain, the same permit, the same summit. The photographs look identical. The Instagram posts are indistinguishable. And the risk? The premium operators emphasize safety. They tout their equipment, their guides, their support systems. But they don't guarantee survival. No one can guarantee survival on Everest. So the budget climber makes a calculation. The premium expedition charges 3 times as much. Does it reduce the death risk by 3 times? No one knows. The statistics aren't publicly available. The deaths aren't categorized by expedition cost. In the absence of data, people gamble, and some of them lose. Sarah Nguyen was not the last person to die on a budget Everest expedition. She wasn't even the last person to die that season. In May 2019, 11 climbers died on Everest. At least 3 of them were using budget operators. Their equipment has never been publicly examined. Their stories have never been told in detail. The industry continued. The system survived. But something had changed. Pasang Dorje's testimony had created a record. Michelle Chen's lawsuit had established a precedent. The photographs of corroded oxygen equipment had circulated through climbing forums and news sites. Budget operators responded by adjusting their practices slightly. Some began replacing equipment more frequently. Some increased staffing ratios. Some added medical screening requirements. Himalayan Peak Adventures, Dawa Sherpa's new company, made changes too. But the changes were mostly cosmetic. The pricing remained the same. The margins remained the same. The fundamental calculation, except higher risk for higher profit, remained unchanged. What actually changed was public awareness. In the years following Sarah's death, climbing journalists began investigating budget expedition practices systematically. They found patterns. Budget expeditions consistently used older equipment. The average age of oxygen cylinders on budget expeditions was 5 years, compared to 2 years on premium expeditions. Budget expeditions consistently understaff. The average climber-to-Sherpa ratio on budget expeditions was 2-to-1, compared to 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 on premium expeditions. Budget expeditions consistently skimp on emergency protocols. Less than 30% of budget operators had formal evacuation plans. Less than 15% had contracts with helicopter services. Less than 5% employed trained medical personnel. The data was damning, but it was also difficult to translate into action. Nepal's climbing regulations are minimal. The Ministry of Tourism issues permits but does not inspect expeditions, examine equipment, or monitor safety practices. There is no licensing requirement for guides, no certification standard for equipment, and no penalty structure for operators whose clients die. International mountaineering organizations have called for reform repeatedly. The reforms don't happen. The climbing industry generates approximately $300 million annually for Nepal's economy. Regulation that reduced climbing volume, even regulation that saved lives, would reduce revenue. The system is designed to continue. But within the climbing community, Sarah's death created a different kind of change. Her story became a cautionary tale, not about the dangers of Everest, but about the dangers of trusting the wrong people. Climbing forums developed budget expedition warning threads. Potential clients began sharing due diligence practices, how to verify equipment ages, how to check guide certifications, how to identify operators with problematic histories. The information wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. And Pasang Dorje became an unlikely advocate. After his amputations, Pasang remained in Kathmandu. He could no longer climb, but he could still contribute to the industry that had shaped his life. He began working with a non-profit organization called the Nepal Mountaineering Association, developing safety training programs for young Sherpas. The training addressed what Pasang called the power problem, the structural imbalance between Western clients and Nepalese guides. Young Sherpas learned how to assess risk, how to communicate concerns, and, critically, how to refuse assignments without destroying their careers. When I was 19, Pasang explained in an interview, I thought I had no power. I thought refusing Dawa meant ending my career. But I was wrong. There were other operators. There were other opportunities. The power I thought he had was power I gave him, because I didn't know I could take it back. The training also addressed equipment inspection. Pasang taught young Sherpas how to identify compromised cylinders, worn regulators, and aged materials. He showed them his photographs from May 2019. He showed them what Sarah's oxygen system had looked like. If I had known what to look for, he said, I might have refused. I might have told Sarah the truth. I might have saved her. or at least given her the information she needed to save herself. The training has reached approximately 400 young Sherpas since 2020. It's a small number in an industry that employs thousands. But it's a start. And the legal precedent Michelle Chen established has had effects beyond Nepal. In 2022, an Australian family whose son died on Kilimanjaro used the Nguyen verdict as precedent in their lawsuit against a Tanzanian tour operator. They won. In 2023, a British court applied similar reasoning to a case involving a trekking death in Peru. The operator settled for £750,000. The pattern is clear. International clients can hold international operators accountable, even when the deaths occur in countries with minimal regulation. The barrier isn't legal theory. The barrier is willingness to litigate, to investigate, to expose. Most families don't have that willingness. They're grieving. They're exhausted. They want closure, not years of legal proceedings. The Nguyen family had something different. They had the same stubbornness Sarah had. The same refusal to accept that some deaths are just accidents. The same determination to find out what really happened, even when the truth was painful. "My daughter didn't die because of the mountain," Duc Nguyen said in an interview after the verdict. "She died because of people. People who lied to her. People who gave her broken equipment. People who decided her life wasn't worth $400. $400. That's what a new oxygen cylinder would have cost." That's the margin between life and death for Sarah Nguyen. The budget expedition industry didn't kill Sarah because it's evil. It killed her because it's efficient. Because every dollar saved is a dollar earned. Because the probability of accountability is low enough that the math works out. Until it doesn't. Until someone like Michelle Chen files a lawsuit. Until someone like Pasang Dorje testifies. Until someone like Duc Nguyen refuses to sign a confidentiality agreement. The system continues. But it's not invisible anymore. And somewhere in Nepal, right now, another budget climber is preparing for Everest. They've read about Sarah. They've weighed the risks. They've done the math. The question is whether they've done the right math. Because the number that matters isn't $22,000 or $65,000 or $400. The number that matters is your life. And the budget expedition industry has already calculated exactly how much that's worth. Chapter 7. What remains? Pasang Dorje lives in a small apartment in Kathmandu. The apartment has no stairs. It has no threshold. It was built after his amputations, designed for a wheelchair, designed for a life that moves differently now. He is 25 years old. He will never climb again. Some mornings, he tells me, he wakes up and forgets. His legs feel present. His feet itch. He reaches down to scratch them, and his hands find nothing. The phantom sensation lasts for seconds. Then he remembers. "I don't regret trying to save her," he said during our final conversation. "I regret not refusing the assignment. I regret not telling Sarah everything I knew. I regret believing that following orders was the same as doing the right thing." He pauses. "But mostly, I regret that Sarah trusted people who didn't deserve her trust. She did everything right. She researched. She prepared. She asked questions. And the people she asked lied to her. That's what I can't forgive. Not the mountain. Not the equipment. The lies." The oxygen cylinder that killed Sarah Nguyen is still in evidence storage somewhere in Sydney. It was examined during the trial. Metallurgists confirmed the corrosion, the compromised threading, the worn regulator. It sits in a box, tagged with a case number, waiting for an appeal that will never come. Sarah's camera was returned to her family after the investigation. They have never watched the footage. Her mother asked me if I thought they should. I told her I didn't know. The footage reportedly shows Sarah's final hours above 8,000 meters. It shows her climbing, stopping, collapsing. It shows Pasang trying to save her. It shows the sunrise over the Himalayas while a woman dies in the snow. Some families would want to see that. Some families would need to see that. The Nguyen family has decided they don't. I know how she died, Lin Nguyen told me. I know she fought. I know she never gave up. I don't need to watch it. I don't need to carry those images. I carry enough already. The purple crayon drawing that Sarah's students made before she left, the one her mother mentioned in the eulogy, hangs in Northcote Primary School's library. The students who drew it are teenagers now. Some of them remember Sarah, some of them don't. The school created a memorial scholarship in her name. It funds outdoor education for students who couldn't otherwise afford it. Every year, 6 students go on week-long wilderness trips, camping, hiking, learning to navigate. We wanted something that would honor who she was, the principal explained. Not the Klim,